What's up, everybody? Welcome on into the slate. Thank you for being with us. The Thursday Sports Edition. We will talk heavy NFL, in particular, this game on the way tonight, Thursday Night Football, featuring the Niners and Seahawks. The return of Brock Purdy. He's healthy. He's fine. Kenneth Walker on the other side is going to play. We'll talk about all this stuff, mix in a little NBA before we get out of here, just to, in fact, make it a multi-sport show. Carrion Thorne is here. Adam Kaufman, thank you for being with us across all the DK channels that you're finding us on. We got Eamon and Andrew behind the scenes. Gary, and let's start with this football game. It's good to see you, by the way. I hate this game. I'm stressed about this game because, as you know, we talk about it every week, especially on the Thursday show. I like to make lineups. I like to have my fun. I like to watch these games. Who doesn't like primetime football on a Thursday? But I like to have a lean. You know what I mean? Like, I like to have a thought, a take going into a game. And other than the obvious, which is Christian McCaffrey is going to be wildly owned, wildly captained in larger GPPs. Like, the projections I was looking at are somewhere in the vicinity of, I think, about 85% owned overall and about 25 or so, maybe 30% even in the captain spot. It's almost, what do you do, obviously, around CMC? I don't know what to expect out of the two primary wideouts for Seattle. I don't know how Ayuk is going to do with no Deebo Samuel now. What should we expect from Walker in his comeback against a stout defense on the other side? Tell me, because you've written about it, how I should feel about this game.
Yeah, I think your initial lean is right. I think there's going to be a lot of attention on CMC. It's not only a fantastic matchup. I mean, you start kind of rolling through his own personal statistics the last 2 weeks when the 49ers have been with their third string quarterback. Understandably, they've leaned a lot on their all-pro running back, which they traded a hefty amount of draft capital to bring into San Francisco earlier this season. Last 2 weeks, he's averaging 20 and a half touches per game. He's obviously been very heavily used in the passing attack as a receiver. He's got 299 scrimmage yards and 3 touchdowns in that span of time. He's playing about 76% of the team's offensive snaps in the last 2 weeks. And that number's big without any sort of asterisk. And then you have to remember that he virtually didn't have to take the field for the entirety of the fourth quarter, as you know, even the national broadcast decided we didn't have to watch any more of that game after the third quarter. So that number could be higher. I think CMC in a competitive script is probably looking at an 80% plus snap share. So yes, I have no problem with captaining CMC. I have no problem using him in every single lineup. He is priced correctly. I will say that. But yeah, where it gets interesting is what to do elsewhere. And I will say, just a general overview of this slate, aside from a couple guys that value has opened up slightly because of the injury to Deebo Samuel for San Francisco. Like, when you look at Seattle's side of the ledger here, there's just not a lot of people priced below 7K who are actually going to play snaps in this game. Like, Seattle is kind of running a system very akin to like the Jared Goff LA Rams, where essentially they've got Kenneth Walker, who's just the running back who's on the field 80% of the time. And I would expect he's probably going to play his normal role if he is in fact healthy. Didn't even have a questionable tag for this game, so it seems like he's 100%. Mm-hmm. And then they've just got their 3 wide receivers. They play all the time. I mean, you even had Goodwin last week getting about a 79% snap share. So maybe you can find some value at the tight ends, although they don't throw to their tight ends at all. A backup running back here or there might get a reception or a carry, but Seattle's offense is pretty concentrated, and all those players are priced properly. So not a lot of value on that side. I think Ray or McLeod is probably going to be the guy who most people gravitate towards, rightfully so. This isn't just a case of, oh, Deebo got hurt last week, let's pick up the cheap wide receiver on San Francisco. It's kind of a perfect storm of, one, we saw Ray play a lot of snaps following Deebo's injury, which speaks to the fact that he's sort of next in line to inherit those snaps. He actually had more snaps than Juwan Jennings, excuse me. Maybe that wouldn't be the case if, again, that game was highly competitive in the fourth quarter. But, you know, it wasn't just that McLeod was on the field. It's that Kyle Shanahan has been talking a lot about Ray McCloud in the lead up to this game, and kind of a where there's smoke, there's fire sort of situation. I don't think you talk this much about McCloud unless you plan on using him. And again, Kyle Shanahan is the exact kind of coach you would want utilizing a player with a diverse skill set like Ray McCloud has. He's not nearly as big as Deebo Samuel, but is someone who hypothetically could run with the football, is someone you want to get the ball into his hands in space and yak. We all know how much San Francisco loves yards after the catch. McCloud fills that role as well. So I think at 1,200, he's going to be the guy paired with McCaffrey in the captain spot that kind of makes the salary work. The other 4 spots after that, maybe that's a little bit more up for debate, and that's where you can kind of find some variance in those lineups.
It is interesting, because of obviously salaries, and we can show people what the salaries look like for anyone that hasn't taken a look at it. I mean, these are the captain's prices. So the flex prices here, CMC, like you said, he's priced well. He's 11-4. You have the 2 quarterbacks that Brock Purdy's actually sub 10K. There were questions as to whether he was going to play. He's going to be out there. He's $9,600. The 2 star wideouts for Seattle, who have both been very reliable of late and scoring a bunch of touchdowns as well. Metcalf and Lockett, they are both 10K plus. But in terms of the projections that, as you know, I always like to look at. So CMC is projected for about 25 points tonight, and nobody would be shocked if he shattered that with what he's been doing of late, like you talked about. But after that, you have the 2 QBs who are both right around 16, 17 points. Lockett and Metcalf were both right around 14 points. Walker, who is right around 13 points. Ayuk, who in theory is the number 1 receiver on this team, is right around a dozen points. And again, with these salaries being what they are, you just have this collection of very kind of evenly ranked people going into this game. And it becomes a question of, you can only afford so much. You can only fit so many. Where do you fade? Who do you trust? What direction should people go in if you're trying to assess, okay, McCaffrey's my captain, but then where do I go?
I mean, I guess you can kind of look at it 2 different ways. You can start by just deciding who you like more in a vacuum. And I would say in that sense, I am sort of gravitating towards the Seattle passing game. I just think the Niners defense is sort of the ultimate funnel defense. I mean, we hear that term a lot in Showdown. They're just so good against the run, and they're often winning games that they force teams into throwing the ball more often than they probably would want to. And obviously, that's been a storyline for Pete Carroll for a long time. He does not want to pass the football if he does not want to. However, teams are throwing the ball, I believe it's almost 63% of the time against San Francisco this season. That's the 3rd highest mark in the NFL. That number has jumped above 70% in their last 3 games in particular, which could sort of correlate with when Eric Armstead came back, another absolute mauler that they get to put along their defensive line. So very hard to run against the Niners. A lot of teams come into the games realizing that, accepting that, and understanding they have to throw the football. And I think we probably see another case of that this week with the Seahawks. I mean, Geno Smith is starting to come back down to earth a little bit. He's been a little shaky in his last couple starts, particularly when it comes to turnovers. And we'll actually get to that in a second, but he's been a very capable quarterback this season. There's no reason to think that he can't have success with the amount of volume that he's going to get in this game. And that sort of goes hand in hand with these Seattle wide receivers who, as you mentioned, have been extremely reliable the last little bit. In fact, DK Metcalf in his last 3 games actually has scored the 3rd most DraftKings fantasy points of any wide receiver in football. He's just under 68 DraftKings points in his last 3 games combined. 33 targets in that span of time. He's just got all the high ceiling and high floor attributes you could possibly want in a wide receiver, particularly at a large price point. Mm-hmm. And then you factor in, for as good as San Francisco's defense is, they've actually allowed the 10th most DraftKings points per game to opposing wideouts, not because they're bad, but again, just because there's so much volume coming at them over and over and over again. So if you have Geno in a lineup, particularly if you already have McCaffrey in a lineup, you're probably only going to be able to afford one of Metcalf or one of Lockett. I lean Metcalf, not just because he's $200 cheaper. I just think there's more target share there as of right now, or at least the last 3-4 weeks. I think he's a bigger play threat. And I also think Metcalf primarily sticks to outside the numbers, which, again, there's no weak point on this San Francisco defense, but they cover the middle of the field better than almost anyone in football, basically because Fred Warner is one of the best zone linebackers in the history of mankind. So I think that affects Lockett's game a little bit more than it affects Metcalf's game. I think he's going to be able to do his thing. I would anticipate double-digit targets if this game goes how I think it's going to go, which is San Francisco is going to be winning this contest. So yeah, I think Seattle's passing game of the two, not that I'm like down on Ayuk necessarily. I just think Purdy is probably, I'd be surprised if Brock Purdy throws the football more than 20 times, maybe like 25. And if that's the case, and McCaffrey's probably locked into like
possibly 10 of those or 8 of those to McCaffrey.
Right. So you're just running out of targets at a certain point. And San Francisco is certainly, as we've seen time and time again, they are not a team that force feed anyone. They drop the plays and what's open is open. And Ayuk could have a massive game. He's been a very consistent fantasy contributor so far this season, but at this price point in an offense that I'm not projecting to have to throw 30 plus times, again, I just think I lean towards the Seattle wide receivers. I think that's where the volume is going to be tonight.
So I didn't hear a whole lot of George Kittle in there.
Well, you haven't heard George Kittle's name a lot if you've been watching San Francisco games lately either.
He's only averaging 10.5 fantasy points this entire season, for that matter. I mean, obviously there's he's not really at a discount. He's still 8K. In fact, he's gone up because we're talking showdown as compared to, what his classic prices have been. But yeah, look at this. We're showing the game log right now. He's got that outlier of 24.5 points against Arizona. I will say that I read this earlier, wrote it down just so I wouldn't forget. The last time he saw Seattle, 42.6 fantasy points.
Yeah.
So, on the subject of outliers, any chance that we see anything representative out of George Kittle, as opposed to 4 out of these last 5 where he's not even hitting 7 points?
At this point, I would just say we at least know he has a ceiling. And while that might seem like an underwhelming statement to say about a guy, like as your number one bullet point, there's value to that on a showdown slate, because I do think he could get lost in the shuffle a little bit tonight. I think anyone who owns him in redrafts is probably just so tired of him in that format. They want nothing to do with him in showdown. Just the perception of Kittle the last year and a half. I mean, as someone who is so good at pass blocking that sometimes he's maybe asked to do that a little bit too much. Yeah, look, I think if you want to use Kittle, there's reason to do it in the sense that, like you said, Seattle's a very vulnerable matchup to tight ends. They have been for quite some time now. And Kittle, it wouldn't shock me if he finished this game with 25 or 30 DraftKings points. I just think the odds of that happening are probably like 10, 15%, which is not to say it can't happen, but the floor is so low right now with Kittle. And again, he's a byproduct of the 49ers and their just almost indifference to passing the football unless they have to. So Kittle's fine. The fact that no one's using him and the fact that he has a high ceiling, that in and of itself makes someone viable. If you're looking at multiple lineups, I wouldn't have the most exposure to him. And if you've only got that one lineup in there tonight, I would probably be avoiding him.
For what it's worth, he is projected to not even reach 10 fantasy points. Doesn't matter. Projections can be wrong, obviously. It's one game. Anything can happen. But he's in line.
I'll say this. I don't think he scores 10. I think he scores 5 or 25. Those are like the two outcomes for George Kittle.
That makes sense. All right. Well, it's sort of in the same way that we weren't talking a lot of George Kittle. You certainly have not been touting Kenneth Walker, who is returning from his injury, has really... he's not been exceptional the last few games that he did play. Very poor in the game that he got hurt because he got hurt, just 3.6 fantasy points. In the 2 prior to that, didn't hit 20, right around, well, you can see it, 13-1, 17 another. You can't see it yet, but we'll show you. And prior to that, he had the 30-point outburst that really kind of put him on everybody's radar against Arizona. He had done it against the Chargers a couple weeks earlier as well. But we were talking pre-show. You have a lot of respect for the Niners defense. I don't know how much respect you have for that unit in terms of actually throwing them in a lineup tonight. We can talk about that later. But with respect to how well they defend the running back position and what they've limited to backs this year so far, Walker's just he's a stay away spot for you.
Yeah. Look, I'll always have a certain level of interest, or at least like I'll tip my cap to any running back who plays over 70% of the offensive snaps at this point in the NFL. Like, it's a dying breed. So at least the opportunity and the volume should be there for Kenneth Walker. However, this isn't just your run-of-the-mill allowing the fewest fantasy points to running backs per game of any team in the NFL kind of defense. This is like they're on a level, they're on a tier by themselves. And then there's everyone else who's good against the run in the NFL. The Niners have yet to allow an opposing running back to rush for 60 yards in a game this season. That's not that many yards. And the problem with Kenneth Walker is, unlike, let's say a Christian McCaffrey, who hasn't actually exceeded 60 yards rushing all that much in 2022, Walker doesn't really do anything else. He's only got 19 receptions to his name this season. That's fine. But this is not an offense designed to throw the ball to the running back, and Walker isn't someone who really forces the issue in that regard either. He's probably 100%. Again, he doesn't have a injury designation. Who am I to call Pete Carroll a liar? But we don't actually know if he's like 100% healthy. He's probably a little banged up. So maybe we see that snap share on a short week fall off just the slightest bit. But I do think when you look at his best games, particularly that one against Los Angeles, the Chargers are the worst run defense in football. Like, that was the perfect matchup for Kenneth Walker. This is not that. This is a game where Walker, if he stays within his archetype, he needs at least a touchdown, possibly two, if he's not catching 3 or 4 passes, to bring back value at this price point. And San Francisco, as it will come to a surprise to no one, is one of 2 teams in the league who has not allowed a rushing touchdown across their last 3 games. So it's just very hard for running backs to accumulate points if they're not catching passes against the 49ers. And that's just not Kenneth Walker's game. So I don't think this is the week for Walker. Maybe if his price point was like around $6K, you could talk me into having some interest, but obviously someone who plays his level of snaps was always going to be priced around $8K.
Sometimes, Gary, and I don't need to tell you this, we talk about it all the time, and it's near and dear to my heart. Sometimes kickers do win showdown lineups.
Mm-hmm.
This does happen, and you have 2 kickers who are very reliable in very good spots here tonight between Robbie Gould and Jason Myers. They are both projected for 7-8 points, which is not a lot of points, but they could easily, reach a dozen or 15 as well if offenses stall out in the red zone and they're going for short field goals, or even you get the occasional 50-plus yarder to get you 5 points, whatever it may be. I'm not saying you captain a kicker. I'm not even saying you necessarily stack the kickers. But what do you feel, or how do you feel about kickers going into this particular contest?
This is a game where you could maybe talk me into some kicker exposure. Just again, there's a lack of viability, and there's a lack of just enticing options sort of between that 7K to 4K price point on this particular slate. So if you need someone to fill out a lineup, you could do worse than Robbie Gould. I mean, I think the Niners are going to move the football pretty easily against this Seattle team. I do think, to me, it doesn't matter who's quarterbacking the Niners. It's just sort of Kyle Shanahan's puppet. But this is a team with their 3rd string quarterback who's nursing an oblique injury. There's a chance they struggle in the red zone. Mm-hmm. That could happen. They could move the ball in between the 20s and not be able to punch it in. On the other side, if Seattle does have some success, if they can, string together a couple long passes, et cetera, they could have trouble punching it into the end zone, particularly if they can't run the football. So that could lead to some field goals on their end. I would say of the options in that area, like sort of your specialty options on a showdown slate, I would probably just rather use 49ers defense. It's a little bit more expensive. It's $5,000, but really nice spot for this unit. I mean, they're viable any week. They're that good, but Seattle's offensive line is starting to crater. They've allowed at least 3 sacks in each of their last 4 games. They have a bottom 6 adjusted sack rate as a unit for the season as a whole. They also turn the ball over a lot, Seattle. 12.8% of their drives this season have ended in a turnover. That is just outside being a top 5 mark in football. So they are a team that has been very, very good to fantasy defenses so far this season. And I think, in my opinion, this is the best defense in football. So I would assume they'll be able to get pressure on Geno Smith. He'll make a couple mistakes, and they could turn that into a touchdown. I mean, it took a while in their game against Miami, but same kind of concept. Pressure, 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 and finally they get that big mistake. I think that could be a blueprint we see in this game for the 49ers.
What about just I don't know if it's a contrarian play or if it's actually a good play. I mean, I realize what we're talking about with the Niners DST, and if we were to show the game log here, 4 straight games of double-digit fantasy points as well. You get 10 most recently against the Bucks. Before that, 18, 15, 11. They have been absurd with and only 1 defensive touchdown in there as well. It's interceptions, it's fumble recoveries, sacks. Obviously, it's just a very active unit, which is good to see. But the Seattle DST as maybe something of a contrarian play, $3,200, maybe for that salary, you'd just be more inclined to want Juwan Jennings as kind of a good points per dollar option or alternative to Brandon Ayuk for that Seattle wide receiving core. But the Seattle DST, while it's not been very good and it's only averaging 6.7, again, you've got a rookie quarterback who's banged up on the other side, who's never started a game on the road. There's no Deebo Samuel, obviously. George Kittle is wildly unreliable. I don't know that I'm going to do it, but I could be talked into it.
I'd rather play the kickers at that point. The Seahawks defense, they're advantageous. I'll say that. They have a ball hawking young secondary, and the highs are high and the lows are low. Like they will, if Brock Purdy threw an interception tonight, wouldn't shock me. But will San Francisco score 30 points to make up for that? Very likely. I just think maybe again, I'm too far like just in the awe of Kyle Shanahan, but this offense is training wheels for a quarterback. Like it's point and shoot, and he's pointing you in the right direction most of the time. You've got that really, really solid running game. And that's also really important when it comes to fantasy defenses. You want teams that are passing more often than not, because passing leads to sacks, passing leads to interceptions. Sure, you can force a couple turnovers with fumbles, rushing the football, but generally speaking, the good stuff for fantasy defenses happen on passing downs. San Francisco doesn't pass that much, so they kind of limit the opportunity to make mistakes for their quarterback. I think if they're winning this game, it's going to be a lot of running the football in the second half, and that just doesn't give Seattle that many chances to rack up fantasy points. So I get the appeal. They're cheap, but not for me. Not against the Kyle Shanahan team.
There's a graphic circulating on Twitter from our buddy Adam Levitan's company talking about the top 1% finishing captain running back lineups. Okay. And because obviously that's what we're talking about with CMC tonight. And basically says that the best pairing with a captain running back is to have a pass catcher from each side. So you're talking about in this game, one of Lockett or Metcalf. On the other side, maybe it's Ayuk or Jennings or whomever it may be. What do you think of that as a strategy as it relates specifically to this game?
Yeah, because again, I think if McCaffrey's hitting his optimum sort of output, San Francisco's winning this game, like not by a crazy amount, like it needs to be sort of competitive, but San Francisco's up by like 2 scores for most of the game. McCaffrey finishes with like 25 touches. And when Seattle has the ball, they're throwing the ball. So they're going to have a pass catching option. There's going to be that drive at the end of the game where the 49ers are playing just prevent shell, and some of the Seahawks passing attack is going to be able to accumulate some numbers. So yeah, that makes a lot of sense to me as a build. Though these are also games where if a running back is hitting his optimum output, just from a like the clock is running perspective, just from a rushing mentality perspective, you don't need a lot of quarterbacks in those lineups because these just don't tend to be quarterback games. So yeah, I think that
certainly between the two, Geno is the one that you want.
Yeah, I'd lean Geno especially, but yeah, I am not one to question Levy in a general sense, and I will not question him on this.
We don't have too much time left, but I want to make sure that we've been fixated on DFS because obviously DraftKings has the $500,000 going to first place and the $1.5 million contest that's available, as well as the position to try and get a ticket to actually Tournament Champions is not available for this one, but just a half $500,000 to first place in the Thursday night $1.5 million contest. But DraftKings Sportsbook, Niners in Seattle, as mentioned, it's 3.5 point favorite for San Francisco on the road. The over-under 43, lower scoring game. What are your betting thoughts on this game here?
I like the 49ers. I think Matt and I talked about that a lot on Tuesday, so we don't really have to drill it into the ground. Yep. I feel like you probably pick up on my my tendencies for this game just from the way I was talking about it for the last half hour. But yeah. I think the over is a really interesting play. I can understand, backup quarterback injured for the 49ers, a great defense for San Francisco as well, why people would think this game goes under the number. I think Seattle's defense is bad. And I think the Niners can put up some points. Like they just scored 35 points on a Buccaneers defense. That is the only thing keeping that team together. Granted, that game would have gone under because that's how good San Francisco's defense is. But I think Seattle's offense is better than Tampa's right now. I think the Seahawks, a lot of passing the football. I think they're going to be able to maybe put up like maybe 21 if we get real garbage timey, but I think they'll score 2 touchdowns and maybe they can add a field goal to that. I think San Francisco does the rest. I think you can really bank on San Fran to score over 30 points tonight.
All right, something to watch for. It'd be interesting. It's definitely going to be it's an ugly game, interesting game, maybe a little bit of both. I'm not entirely sure. With the few minutes that we have left, though, let's transition over to the NBA. These light slate. It's just the 4 games, obviously. Couple beginning in the 8 o'clock hour. What are you looking at in particular as we just get some tonight, some tomorrow, but it feels like we have stars that are getting ruled out across the league at just a rapid degree to where there's a lot of value to discover here. And I can break down some of the better projected plays anyway. Looking at, I'm just pulling up these 4 games here, and obviously we'll show you some of the stars. There's Giannis, there's Morant, there's Zion, Butler, Booker, Adebayo, that sort of thing. Is it more of a pay down for night for you and the CJ McCollums and Tyler Heroes and Kevin Porter Jr.'s, Chris Middletons of the world, or are there studs that you're drawn to?
No, I think especially with what's transpired across the last couple hours, with having Miami on this slate, with having Los Angeles on this slate, you almost have to pencil in the morning, like, oh, this is all going to change by 5 o'clock. These injury reports are going to be stupid because they always are. I think on a slate this size, I'm almost of the mindset, like you start with Giannis, you start with Ja, and then you find the value elsewhere. I just think that's going to be a competitive game. It's going to be a game where these guys have to play maybe even just like a little above their normal allotment of minutes. And that's going to be an up-tempo game too. I mean, Memphis is an up-tempo team. They play really well at home. I could just see those 2 guys sort of like setting the floor for your lineups, basically just supplying the volume. You get 110, 120 DraftKings points from those 2 guys, and then you figure it out with the value plays elsewhere. You go over to a Clippers and you start going like, okay, John Wall, Robert Covington, and just sort of like kind of figure it out and piece it together. I mean, actually, Los Angeles is probably something we should talk about a little bit if we just want to bring up like that pricing list for a second, because their game is crazy right now. They've got no Paul George, no Kawhi Leonard, no Reggie Jackson, no Norman Powell. like I said, Wall got the night off last night in preparation for this game. I think they knew what they were going to do. He's going to have a ton of usage. He's probably only going to play like 28 minutes, but he's going to have a ton of usage. I mean, if Zubac doesn't play, goodness gracious, like then you're in Moses Brown territory. So watch out for that. But as things stand right now, Wall's a great play. Terrence Mann is a fantastic play at 4,400. He's probably going to be like the lead guard. I'd say he'll start, Wall come off the bench, and Marcus Morris. Marcus Morris is just a solid play at 5,100. A guy who's going to get you rebounds. His usage rate obviously bumps up an astronomical amount when Paul George and Kawhi Leonard and Norman Powell aren't on the court. Imagine that. But yeah, this is the team a lot of people are going to be drawing value from, them and the Heat to some extent. But the thing about the Heat, even though they've got 11 bajillion guys on their injury report tonight, as long as Bam plays, they'll still have Butler, Bam, and Hero. So at the end of the day, you're kind of just fighting for scraps. And the problem with the Heat as well is DraftKings is kind of onto their shtick. So most of the mid-tier Heat players are kind of priced up anyway. So like, unless you're going to use Duncan Robinson, who I don't really want to use, I would say Los Angeles is my preferred spot to find value as opposed to Miami. That is, again, with the huge asterisk that Bam actually does play through his questionable tag.
Yeah, or Phoenix. It's the Clippers and it's the Suns. I mean, you got Bismack Biyombo available to you. You got Landale. Jock Landale is there as well at $3,100, and he could be projected for north of 20 points.
Yeah, again, if Zubac and Bam don't play, you're going to see a ton of value center and then value center in the utility spot lineups, because there's going to be so much value at the center position.
Well, it'll be fun. These little 4-gamers, they get a little tricky. I'm a little more maybe personally interested and invested in the football game tonight, but nevertheless, all eyes on NBA at all times in the background at the very least. To see what's going on. And of course, tomorrow we get the return of Rob Williams that I'm excited about. As per the national insiders, he will make his season debut for the defending Eastern Conference champs against the Orlando Magic, who have been surging. They only have 9 wins all year, but the last 4 have come in a row. So
yeah, they're good. They're good now. That's why the Raptors lost them twice. It's because they're good, not because the Raptors are bad. Don't let anyone tell you that.
That's right. That's what we need to tell ourselves.
Yeah.
Thanks to Eamon. Thanks to Andrew and all of you out there watching. And there are no Sims tonight, remember, obviously, because obviously it is a Thursday. There's Thursday night football. Sims do return tomorrow, and throughout the entire day, you will have a half dozen of them taking you over the course of the entire day. The Sweat comes at you 11 o'clock tomorrow morning. The Slate just after 5 as usual. I think Glash will guide you through that one. LaMarco will be on, maybe Ulrich as well if there's a moose sighting. It's hard to tell sometimes, but Garion, great pleasure, my friend. Always fun.
It's a good time.
All right. See you guys.